good for me to go ahead.
Okay, and we are back to the live stream. We're joined by Craig Boyle, Commissioner of Taxes. I got that right?
Yes.
And we are talking about H66, the paid family leave bill. Let's go around the table quickly since we haven't been here before. And so we'll do very quick introductions. Representative Robin Chestnut Tanger, Rutland Bennington District. Vice Chair sitting in for Representative Stevens.
Representative Sawyer Lamont from Lamoille, Washington District.
Joe Parsons, I represent Thompson, Groton, and Newbury.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax and Most Georgia.
Good morning, Dennis LeBounty. I cover Linden, Sutton, Newark, Sheffield, Wheelock.
Good morning, I'm Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Heartland, West Windsor and Windsor, and I live in West Windsor.
I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex, Orleans, District 1.
I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland District 6.
And thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner, and thank you to the members of the committee for the introductions and having me in to talk about this. So I have a few high-level points and then also some technical things on the bill that I thought I would just go through the sections to flag where we've had questions or points that we're hoping to get clarified.
Do you have written testimony?
I do not. I just have a copy of the bill. So my headline is one that you'll have heard from the governor himself, right? That the governor is not interested, will not support a new payroll tax that increases the tax burden on Vermonters. And the administration's preference is to continue with the program that's going to be launching for state employees this summer and then expanding in the coming years that I believe the committee is hearing about in the session right after mine from people who can speak to that plan more readily than I can. So I'll speak about the tax side and the payroll tax today. I also understand the committee is interested in hearing from me about if my department can administer a payroll tax. And so my high level answer is yes, we can. But there are a number of things that I do think that the committee and the legislature should be thoughtful about, and also some clarifications and questions that we've had as we've reviewed the bill internally. So I'll start with, I think, 4 high level points, a mix of policy and operations. So the first is that doing this through a tax will create some inequities that wouldn't necessarily exist with doing it through an insurance program where everybody pays the same premiums, right? So for instance, you have to define income, right? You have to define employees, you have to define self-employment income, right? So think about how a day trader might be defined as business income with their capital gains, but somebody who's not doing that is not, right? That's going to create a difference in both the eligibility for those folks who are involved in those different ventures, as well as the contributions. Similarly with a long-term tenant landlord who just reports income on Schedule E and not part of Schedule SE versus a business operator for a short-term rental, right? So these are the kind of things that can get really complicated in the space of tax policy that I'd encourage the legislature to be thoughtful about. The second thing that has sort of hit me at a high level is, so my understanding of the bill is that the wage cap to pay into the system is double the Social Security cap. So I think for 2023, that would be about the range of $320,000. But people at that level can only take out in benefits up to the state weekly average wage. So you're going to have a number of folks who are above that weekly average wage who are paying into the system more than they can take out in benefits. I have a question, maybe a concern about, will that create pressure for companies that have high average wage employees to opt out of the system? And what will that do to the solvency of the fund? What will that do both to the rate long-term if you don't have those folks who are paying in without the ability to take out what they've paid in? And what will it do to the composition of who is paying that? So that's sort of a question. I don't believe that's accounted for in the Joint Fiscal Office's modeling right now, but certainly they could correct me if I'm wrong. This is maybe a smaller point because of the impact of this, but it is an important one, which is each time we add something on that is mandatory for wage earners and not necessarily mandatory for self-employed, you increase the pressure. I don't know if pressure is the right word to use. You increase the chances that a business might push to misclassify employees, right? So that they don't have to carry that cost burden. And that has real impacts on those individuals who get misclassified. It also has impacts throughout the system on unemployment insurance and the rest of the tax system as well. And the big operational piece I would hit before I start to jump into specific sections is that the bill does not currently have any positions for my department to administer the tax. And we are, I think, a very effective and efficient department, but I can't do it with 0 new people. So I don't know exactly how many people would be needed to do it today. We are working on that. We're working with getting in contacts with other states who have these taxes to understand what their FTE counts look like. We're pegging it against our own withholding taxes and things like that to try to get an estimate, but I don't have that number today. I also don't know today what the costs for our IT implementation would be. We have a capable system, but there would be costs to add a new tax. And so, again, I'm working with other state agencies. I know of 2 that use the same tax software that we use. It's called GenTax. Here in Vermont, we call it VTax. I believe the state of Massachusetts and Oregon both have a payroll tax. So I'm trying to get in contact with them to understand their implementation and ongoing costs. So those will have to be addressed. I don't have exact numbers today, but I can't do it with 0. So if it works, I thought I would just start going through a couple of the sections of the bill and just highlighting areas that maybe I'd call them questions or concerns. I'll start on page 4 where it defines average weekly earnings. And I would flag 2 things here. One, so it mentions the 2 highest earning quarters, both for wage earners and for self-employed folks. There's a challenge that I see here in that self-employed folks will, if the quarters happen to fall in a prior tax year, they should have a tax return that talks about that. But I don't know if they're going to have real-time data on what their self-employment earnings are in the current year's quarters. And I'm not sure that any state agency has that either. Certainly DOL can help with wages and in fact, the employees themselves could show what their pay stub looks like. But self-employed, I think, would be a little more challenging. As I was reading this, I also realized there's what may seem like a small provision in here, but actually could create a big operational problem for us where it says, upon which contributions have been paid. And so that seems to me like there's now a link between us at the tax department making sure that actual contributions were paid on those quarters. And if there's an expectation from the legislature that we would help verify that for, in this version of the bill, it's the treasurer's office that's carrying out the benefit side, we don't track anything like that by employee today. So when we handle withholding, we handle individual employee information only on an annual basis when we handle the W-2s. So on a quarterly basis, we're not getting employee by employee information. I am a little worried about the burden that would put on businesses and the burden that that would put on our department. If it's not the intention of the legislature for us to be actually verifying that for who's handling the benefits, I would question if that is really needed in there, and that would help relieve that pressure for everybody.
Man, you're really. Okay, Representative Stevens.
Does that, so when I file a quarterly payment, isn't that recorded in that I've done that as an individual?
Yes. Are you're talking about like estimated payments for self-employed folks?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we track that, but the rules for estimated payments on personal income tax, and my read of this bill is that the self-employed version of this would just roll into personal income tax, is that you have to pay either 90% of current year's tax liability or 100% of prior years. Many people are just paying on that 100% of prior years because that's the known amount. And so that's still the tax amount as well. It's not necessarily the weekly earning amount. So we would know that tax payments were made for self-employed individuals. I could say a payment has been made. I guess we could ask them if part of that is for their personal income taxes and part of that is for their self-employed. But again, if somebody's working for a company, they won't report employee by employee information to us either. And that's the much larger audience here, right, than compared to the self-employed. So I think it comes down to if the legislature is looking for us to verify that before benefits get paid, that's a big question. If that's not an important part to the legislature, I wonder if we could just scrap that, but it's a decision for you folks, of course.
Well, I think we're looking for some verification that they are making, that they are like the math of what the weekly wage replacement would be done at the treasurer's office, but
Yep.
verification is that they have filed their taxes, because again, we can get from the Department of Labor, we can get a certain amount of information about whether people are, from the business side, whether people are getting paid.
Yeah, and that's because the Department of Labor tracks that employee by employee during the quarters, right? We don't generally at tax. So that would be an expansion for us and just an area of concern for me.
And I guess for me, the idea of the expansion, getting an idea of what it would take is part of what overhead would be.
Sure.
In terms of our in this proposal, 7.5. All right, no, thank you.
Just to clarify, since you're speaking quickly and my tax knowledge is
Sorry.
minimal. So that information does exist, tracked by Department of Labor, but not by the tax department. And so it could be available for a cost for an administrative fee.
So there's a few elements, right? So it's one is so when we take a withholding return, we get them quarterly, right? But it's all aggregated. How many employees do you have? And what was your total payroll for the quarter? And then how much total withholding did you send? We don't know that you paid Bob $5,000 and you paid Sally $5,000 and this is the withholding for them. We just know that cumulatively you paid all your employees this. We get the employee by employee information annually when we get the W-2s. But so for this, if what we have to track is by quarter to ensure that contributions were made for a specific employee in the quarter, that's information we don't have now. What labor tracks is wages paid wages paid per employee per quarter. And so that's more expansive than what we do. But in this case, if we're collecting the tax at the tax department, that would be an expansion for us to start tracking employee by employee contributions on a quarterly basis. Whereas today we do that on an annual basis for employee by employee.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure. Did that help? Okay, perfect. My next page that I would flag is page 9, where it defines self-employed individual and says, okay, sole proprietor, partner owner of an unincorporated business. What is a question for me here is sole shareholder of a corporation that does not have any employees other than the shareholder. So is the intention here for an S corp an owner S corp where you have to pay yourself a wage? Are they considered self-employed or are they considered an employee on this? But it maybe is a wider question too. Why couldn't a sole owner have employees? And maybe that's the intention of the legislature and we could just clean it up there. But it's not entirely clear to me with the existing language what that would look like. And so if we understood the intention, I'm sure we could try to help adjust that. But that was the one question I had in there.
I questioned this the other day, and it seems like it would be clearer if on line 4, you put an or between the word business and the sole member.
I think that's actually a different issue that I had. I do think that would help. But I think maybe a clarification on what is intended with a subchapter S corporation here could be useful. I don't think that's a huge deal. I think we can, that's doable, but it just wasn't clear to me based on reading this what the outcome would be there. Page 12. Page 12, D. The provision that allows an employer to pay more than 50% of the contributions. The federal FICA taxes are 50-50, right? And I could see this provision causing a lot of confusion. I am not an expert on the economics of payroll taxes, but I think the Congressional Budget Office does outline in a nonpartisan way that even the employer portion of payroll taxes is borne at least in part by the employees. So part of me is wondering what's the real value in having this provision with the confusion that it can cause. It also causes real complexity later with the refunding provision for low income contributors. because I'm guessing that the legislative intent is to only refund the portion that was paid by the employee. So I don't know how strongly the legislature feels about this being an important part of it. I could see it causing confusion. I'm not sure how we would track it. I could see it causing confusion for employees as well. And I'm not sure what the aim is there to move away from the FICA model of 50-50.
I think the aim is that as a benefit that an employer can offer. It's a way to attract employees. We'll cover all of it for you. That's a benefit you wouldn't get at the company next door.
It's an interesting philosophical discussion, right? Because again, if the tax incidence is really borne by the employee, right, that's more of a psychological thing than a financial thing. So I'll just flag it that I think it could cause confusion and would urge thoughtfulness there. Further down on that page in 2B, it defines covered work income for self-employed individuals. And maybe I've missed this elsewhere in the bill, but so I have a question about, does it matter where the person lives versus where they work? So if you're a Vermonter who owns a business that only operates in New Hampshire, will that qualify? And likewise, if you live in New Hampshire and have a business that only operates in Vermont, would that qualify? And then how is it handled if it's split between your business operates in Vermont and New Hampshire? And I don't know if that's defined elsewhere, but that was something that I wasn't sure of as I was reading the bill.
There's a definition that says that this is based on income tax paid in the state of Vermont.
Income tax paid in the state of Vermont. Okay, so that would be either you worked in Vermont, so that would allow a New Hampshire resident who's operating a business in Vermont to claim it, as well as the Vermont resident who's operating the New Hampshire business to claim it.
If they're paying.
If they're paying in Vermont.
Well, if they're a Vermont resident, all their income is taxable to Vermont, regardless of where they work. So I just, if that's what's intended, you're golden. If that's not what's intended, we should work on. Page 13. This is a small thing, but I thought I would flag it. So it looks like the rate will change on a fiscal year. Our withholding tables generally change on a calendar year. So you're going to have employers and employees changing people's paychecks in the middle of the year. Might cause some questions. I don't know how many headaches it would cause for businesses, but it is a distinction there.
What line is that? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, that's line 9 and 10 on, I think it's 9 and 10 on page 13. And then I would flag C2 starting on line 14. So I think what is intended there is that the contributions, even for the employee's share, are always the responsibility of the employer, which again would match the federal FICA taxes. I would ask if what I've just described is the intention that that's made more explicitly clear in some kind of language saying any unpaid contributions will be the responsibility of the employer. If that's not the intention, and the intention is that the department would bill individual employees for their share, I think we have a much bigger conversation to have, but I'm not sure that's what's intended here. So I would just ask for a clarification there. I also think there's a little bit of cleanup that could happen with lines 20 and 21. It's referencing Vermont income tax. But I think the intention is for it to function like withholding tax as well, where there's personal liability and things like that. So would ask for that clarification as well. I take by the silence that the intention is that it's the employer's responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we do not have our attorney here with us, but he will, through the joy of technology, will be able to, if he's already listening, he might be listening, but we'll cross check all this with.
I don't have mine here either, so I'm happy to help connect. Page 15 is a little, I recognize a little outside of my lane in the tax realm, but I do recognize that starting on line 18 through 21, it's defining who's eligible. And what seems to be missing there is a longtime employee of a Vermont company, Vermont resident, who works for a company that has opted out of the public system and then takes a new job at a company that has not opted out and is part of this system and then has a qualifying event soon after that. So that employee would have been paying into the premiums that their employer in the private system had, move into a company that doesn't have that and is not eligible for it, despite having paid family leave premiums in their prior life. So again, I just flag it. I'm not an insurance expert, but that was something that had hit me as I'm not sure if that's the intention or not.
Okay.
And then I'm jumping way ahead, page 27. Again, a little outside my lane, but just flag as a person who is an administrator in state government. The first 3 lines of page 27, basically, if I'm reading that right, says that any overpayment by mistake of the division, in this case, the treasurer's office paying the benefits, is the people are not liable to pay it back. And again, as somebody who runs what I think is a very high service level shop at the tax department, we make mistakes sometimes. And I look at something like that and I just think, whoa, like what if the treasurer's office accidentally sent somebody 100,000 when they meant to send them 1,000? Like, do they really not have to pay it back? So I just flag that again as what's really the intention there. And page 33 and 34 are the last of the items that I've flagged from my chair. So line 9, the refunds of contributions. So at a high level, this feels like a lot of work for $70, right? Like this would be us standing up a refund system. It instructs us to stand up a refund system that is not necessarily tied to the personal income tax code as well, because it calls for adopt rules to allow an employee or an enrolled self-employed individual who is not required to file a return to petition for a refund under this section. That'll have a big impact on cost, I think. And what I would really advise in this case, I understand the legislature's concern that folks who are at lower incomes are not necessarily required to file personal income tax returns, and that can feel daunting. But federally, and now especially in Vermont after Act 138 last year, there are a lot of reasons that low income folks should want to file personal income taxes in Vermont. There are a lot of refundable credits that will make it so that even with a very low tax liability, you're likely getting a refund back from the state, right? We expanded the earned income tax credit. There's a new child tax credit. We expanded the child independent care tax credit. So as a tax administrator and as an operations guy, right, I'm always worried about creating another channel that people have to go through. If somebody has, in this case, they must be receiving earned income, right, as either a wage earner or a self-employed individual, less than $25,000. They're almost certainly going to qualify for the earned income tax credit, right, which is going to be a big reason for them to want to file personal income taxes in Vermont. They're almost certainly going to get a refund back from that. So to the degree that the legislature is set on a mechanism to get this money back, I would strongly urge a mechanism that's a very simple $50, $75 personal income tax credit that's not necessarily tracked dollar for dollar to the contributions paid by these folks. Again, us tracking that to the dollar could be challenging, and not having a separate system from personal income taxes. Understanding that the challenges that some folks might have there, but there's volunteer preparation service, there's Free File Alliance, we stand by ready to help. And I think that the folks who are in this cohort are going to have real benefits from filing personal income taxes in Vermont with these refundable credits. So I strongly urge a change there to have it look more towards the personal income tax code and just offering a credit for there. And then the last thing is a small thing, but the confidentiality provisions look good to me, except for I think that we at tax might need info back from DFR about who has opted out, right? So at my department, we would have an employer who's signed up for withholding, and we might say, why aren't they collecting the payroll tax as well? And look for information from DFR to say they've opted out. I'm not familiar with their confidentiality provisions offhand, so they might already be able to share that info, but to the degree that they can't, I would appreciate that ability to get that info from the Department of Financial Regulation.
I'm sorry, what page and line was?
Sorry, page 34. It starts on 33, I should say. It's the confidentiality provisions, which are fine in terms of what I appreciate the may instead of shall undisclose, and the guardrails around how and the other provisions that I might need to be considered of to disclose it. That all sounds good to me. What may be missing is the Department of Financial Regulation sharing info back to the tax department. It also may be elsewhere in the bill, and apologies if it is and I've missed it. So that's what I brought. Thank you for bearing with me as I jumped around to a number of different sections.
No, true, I'm sorry, it's your meeting.
No, we truly appreciate that. Thank you for coming in, and that was a quick download, but I appreciate your thorough reading of it and thoughtfulness. Are there questions for the Commissioner? Representative Parsons.
Thank you. I guess I have just a question moving on the border town. Something I've thought about, never asked yet, so I don't know if you have the answer. So if you live in Vermont and work at a New Hampshire company, like a lot of folks do in our area, this bill opens and moves the goalpost from that 10 individuals that the state has for the 12-week leave protected to 1 employee. The New Hampshire company you work for is still at the 10 or 50 or whatever the number is. Do you qualify for the leave still?
I'm not sure I fully followed the question.
I don't know if I said it very clearly. In the bill, you can take, it brings it down to 1 employee. So if you work at a company with 9 employees in New Hampshire, and live in Vermont, you're paying into the system. But if your New Hampshire employee isn't required to give you that 12 weeks off because as a company with 9 employees, you're not protected in your job.
Oh, okay. So let me, as a guy who is not an insurance expert, I'm not sure that I want to answer that question. I'm not sure I can intelligently. I might defer to the Department of Financial Regulation and their read on the bill. But yeah, so I understand your question, because my read of the bill is that the New Hampshire employer would be required to do the payroll contributions for the Vermont employee. I think your question is, does the bill provide strong enough protections for that employee who's working for the New Hampshire employer? As a tax guy, I'm not sure I can answer that.
I didn't know if you were the right guy. When you said that, I've been thinking of it, and I don't know if your job's actually protected when you take this leave. Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Representative Lamont.
Thank you. I was trying to understand because the tax stuff, and we were talking about seasonal or temporary workers, and so I started to think about college students who come here and sometimes take jobs for the time that they're here for their schooling. Do they file taxes in Vermont or back where they live? How does that work, and where would that put them in?
You've asked a very big question. I'm trying to answer it. So residency and domicile is complicated. There is an easy trigger for residency in Vermont law, which is 6 months and a day. So if you're here for more than 6 months and a day, you're at least a part year resident. And if you are at least a part year resident, you should be filing taxes here. If you're a resident, you're always filing taxes here, right? So let's take the simplest. If you're a full year resident, all of your income is taxable to Vermont. You should be filing taxes in Vermont. If you work or earn income elsewhere, you will also be subject to the income taxes in those states to the degree they're applicable. And you get what's called an other states credit to Vermont to make sure you don't get double taxed. Every state, I think, has that kind of system that says if you're a resident, all your income's taxable here. If you get income elsewhere, we'll give you another state's credit. The part year resident is also going to be paying taxes here on a portion basis of their income, right? They will also then be filing probably as either a part year resident in their home state or maybe a non-resident in their home state when they go back, and they'll be apportioning that income. Where it gets really tricky is, do people qualify for residency under the 6 months? And then we start talking about things like domicile. And so that's a much trickier issue that's really case by case, but it's like, do you know you're going back? Do you know you're just here for a short amount of time? Or did you come here? Did you sign a lease? Did you bring your dog? Did you, all of those kind of things? Did you change your voter registration and your driver's license, right? So when you're under 6 months, we look at those kind of domicile questions. When you're over 6 months, by law, you're at least a part-year resident in Vermont. And so I guess I haven't read thoroughly enough to know how this might impact part-year residents or the non-resident or the less than 6 months who are domiciled here. I'm happy to do that, but I don't know if I know offhand how that impacts here. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Thank you. You answered the question.
Oh, perfect then.
And I think for details, I think again, we'll try to read it through again, but it's that idea that 2 quarters in the last 4 for Vermont income taxes would qualify you for participation in the program. I'm not sure that we have a residency requirement, except based on if you were working here. We'll have to read it through. When we read it through, we'll pay attention to that.
I'm also wondering if, there's a fairly large section here on rulemaking. The commissioner, the director will do rulemaking for the eligibility of the program, and I'm wondering if some of these vagaries will be could be addressed in rulemaking rather than in the statute. Or is it better to address them in statute?
Well, I get in these areas, I think it's probably better to address them in statute, but it's a fair question about what could be, what of that I've raised today on the tax side could be raised in rulemaking. I haven't discussed that thoroughly with our counsel, so I'm happy to do that. And then follow up as needed on that. It's a fair question that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about.
And I'm not, not trying to say, oh, we don't have to address your.
Yeah, no, understood where you're coming from.
Other questions? You've given us a lot to digest, given me a lot to digest. I appreciate that, your thoughtful reading. Anything further? If not, we appreciate your time, and may reach out again if we have other questions.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.